The moment my daughter looked me in the eyes and said, "It's mine now," I felt something inside me break, not because of the words themselves, but because of the coldness behind them. This wasn't the same little girl who used to run into my arms after school, clutching a crayon, drawing, and shouting, "For you, Mommy." This was someone else. Someone hardened by greed, blinded by entitlement, and convinced that love could be measured in assets and deeds. It started 2 months ago, right after my health scare. I had been rushed to the hospital after fainting in my kitchen, and when the doctors mentioned that it might have been a minor heart issue, my daughter, Cynthia, was the first to show up. At first, I was touched. She held my hand, brought me flowers, and promised she'd take care of everything while I recovered. But as the days passed, her kindness began to feel calculated. She asked where I kept the house documents, how much my savings were, whether I'd updated my will. She said it was such gentle concern that I almost didn't notice the undertone at first. Almost. After I returned home, she insisted on helping with the bills. She started answering calls from the bank, sorting mail, and taking on errands. I thought she was simply being helpful. I wanted to believe that maybe, after years of distance between us, she was finally trying to reconnect. But it didn't take long before I realized she wasn't reconnecting. She was taking control. One morning, as I sat with my tea, she came into the living room holding a folder. "Mom," she said carefully, "we need to talk about the future. You shouldn't have to deal with the stress of managing everything. It's time to transfer the property to me. That way, if anything happens, I'll be ready to take care of it." I stared at her for a moment, the words heavy in the air. "Cynthia, I'm not dying," I replied with a soft laugh, hoping to ease the tension. But she didn't smile. "That's not the point," she said. "It's just smarter to do it now. You can trust me." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to trust her. She was my only daughter. The thought of doubting her felt cruel, unnatural. But there was a flicker in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. A hunger. "I'll think about it," I said. Her expression shifted, almost imperceptibly, from concern to impatience. "You always say that, Mom. You never act. And when it's too late, who's supposed to clean up the mess?" The sting of her tone left me speechless. I had raised her alone after her father passed away. I worked double shifts, skipped meals, and gave up dreams I once had just so she could chase hers. And now, the little girl I had sacrificed everything for was standing in front of me, treating me like an obstacle to her inheritance. A few days later, I found out she had already visited my lawyer, without telling me. She tried to convince him that I wanted to transfer ownership of my estate. My lawyer, an old friend named Howard, called me immediately. "Eleanor," he said on the phone, his voice serious, "your daughter came to see me. She claimed you were too ill to manage your affairs. She even brought a pre-drafted document." I sat there, frozen. "What document?" "A transfer of property," he replied. "Your signature was missing, but everything else was filled out." My hands trembled as I set the phone down. I didn't know whether to cry or scream. How could she? When she came by that evening, I confronted her. "Cynthia, did you go to Howard's office?" Her expression didn't waver. "Yes," she said flatly. "I'm just trying to make sure you're protected." "Protected from what?" I asked. "From yourself," she said sharply. "You're old, Mom. You don't understand how the world works anymore. You could be scammed, manipulated." "By who?" I cut her off. "The only one trying to manipulate me is you." That was when she lost her composure. "You're being ridiculous," she snapped. "That house, this house, is going to be mine anyway. Why are you making things so difficult?" Something inside me shifted in that moment. It was as if a lifetime of pain, sacrifice, and silent endurance suddenly condensed into a single spark of clarity. I looked her straight in the eye and said quietly, "Cynthia, it's not yours. Not yet. And maybe not ever." She scoffed, grabbed her purse, and stormed out, slamming the door so hard that one of the framed pictures on the wall fell to the floor. I picked it up slowly, a picture of her at age 6, grinning with ice cream all over her face. I sat there for a long time, staring at that photo, feeling the ache of 1,000 memories pressing against my chest. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing her voice echoing in my head. It's mine now. But then I remembered something my late husband used to say. Money shows you who people really are, but loss shows you who you really are. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to let greed define my last chapter. If she saw my estate as a trophy, I'd turn it into a lesson, one she'd never forget. I called Howard and said, I need to rewrite my will. Immediately. He hesitated. Eleanor, are you sure you want to make such a drastic change? I smiled faintly. Howard, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Over the next few days, I met with him, reviewed every detail, and signed the new documents. My estate, my home, my investments, all of it was being redirected. Not to my daughter, not to any relative, but to charity, to a foundation that helps single mothers, just like I once was. When everything was finalized, Howard handed me the final copy. You understand? He said gently. Once this takes effect, she'll get nothing. I know, I replied, my voice steady. It's not revenge, Howard. It's correction. The following evening, Cynthia returned, acting sweet again, pretending as if nothing had happened. She brought groceries, hugged me, and asked if I needed help organizing my papers. I played along. I smiled. I thanked her. I even let her cook dinner. But deep down, I knew the storm was coming. And this time, I was ready for it. A week passed, and Cynthia's behavior became strangely predictable. Every time she visited, she'd come with a smile, but her eyes would wander, not toward me, but toward my drawers, the study desk, the safe in the corner. She wasn't checking on her mother. She was checking on her future. I kept quiet. I didn't let on that I knew what she was after, or that I had already changed everything. Howard and I agreed to keep the updated will under strict confidentiality. My only task now was patience, waiting for the right moment when the truth would reveal itself. One Saturday morning, she arrived unannounced with her husband, Greg. I liked Greg once. He was polite, humble, and seemed to genuinely care for her when they first married. But lately, I'd noticed the shift. His words felt rehearsed, his tone slightly condescending. He'd learned well from my daughter. Mom, Cynthia said sweetly as they stepped inside, we just wanted to check on you. You've been so quiet lately. I'm fine, dear, I replied, just taking time for myself. Greg smiled, setting down a box of pastries. We thought we could spend the afternoon together. Maybe talk about, the future. There it was again. The future. I poured them tea, listening as they circled around the topic like vultures waiting for their meal. Cynthia began with concern. You shouldn't live alone, Mom. Then moved to flattery. You've done so well managing everything. And finally, landed right where I knew she would. She said, tapping her fingers against her cup. Greg and I were thinking, maybe we could help you by taking over some of the responsibilities. Bills, maintenance, property taxes. It's a lot for you to handle. I looked at her. You mean your responsibilities, not mine? She blinked, thrown off by my tone. What? I leaned back. Because what you're really saying is, you want control, not to help me, but to own what I've built. Her cheeks flushed. Mom, that's unfair. We just want to make things easier for everyone. Greg jumped in, his voice smooth like oil. Eleanor, please, you've got to see her point. We're just trying to secure the family's future. Surely that's what you'd want. I gave a small, knowing smile. Yes, Greg, I do want to secure the family's future. That's exactly what I've done. Cynthia's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Oh, nothing, I said, waving a hand. You'll find out soon enough. They exchanged a quick glance. Uneasy, but curious. I could see the question forming behind their polite expressions. Had she already done something? Over the next few days, they began calling more often. Cynthia even started dropping by under the guise of helping with chores. Once, I caught her going through my desk drawers while she thought I was asleep. I didn't confront her. I simply watched from the hallway, silent, invisible. When she found nothing, her visits became less patient and more desperate. She started making small, passive-aggressive comments. You know, Mom, some people your age start forgetting things. Maybe it's time to let someone else handle your documents. I smiled softly. Don't worry, dear. My memory's as sharp as ever. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. I was sitting in my garden trimming the roses when she arrived again, this time not with groceries or smiles, but with anger simmering beneath the surface. Mom, she began sharply. I need to know what's going on. I didn't look up. What do you mean? I went to Howard's office. That made me pause. Slowly, I turned to her. You did what? She crossed her arms, chin raised defiantly. Don't look so shocked. You've been acting strange. And I wanted answers. But he refused to tell me anything. He said I wasn't authorized. So I know you've changed something. My hand stilled over the flowers. The sun cast a golden glow on her face, but there was nothing warm about her expression. It was all calculation now. I stood up slowly, brushing the soil off my gloves. You went behind my back again. Her voice grew sharp. You're my mother. I have a right to know what's happening with our estate. Our estate? I repeated softly. I didn't realize I had business partners. Mom, stop being dramatic, she snapped. You're old, and you can't keep clinging to this stuff. It's time to let go. Her words cut deeper than she realized. But instead of responding in anger, I simply took a deep breath and said, You know, Cynthia, I once dreamed of growing old, surrounded by family who loved me, not for what I had, but for who I was. I see now that dream was mine alone. She looked away, guilt flickering briefly in her eyes before she hardened again. You'll thank me one day, she muttered. You'll see that I was right. I gave her a small smile. Maybe. But until then, I suggest you stop worrying about my affairs, because they're no longer yours to inherit. Her eyes widened. What? You heard me, I said calmly. Everything is already taken care of. She stared at me, her face pale. You wouldn't dare. Wouldn't I? I whispered. That night, I received a furious text from her, pages of accusations and guilt-tripping. She said I was being manipulated, that I was ungrateful for her help. But as I read through the messages, I realized something incredible. For the first time in years, I didn't feel weak. I didn't feel afraid. I felt free. Over the following week, I finalized every last detail with Howard. The foundation papers were filed, and my estate was now under the ownership of the Eleanor Hope Trust, dedicated to helping single mothers rebuild their lives. I even arranged for a public announcement to be made once I was gone, detailing where every cent had gone. When Howard handed me the final confirmation, he smiled. You've turned your pain into purpose, Eleanor. I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my chest. I just hope she learned something from it. He sighed. And if she doesn't? I looked out the window, watching the afternoon light fall across the garden. Then she'll learn what it feels like to lose something she took for granted. Later that week, Cynthia came storming into my house again, waving her phone. I just saw your name in a charity document. Did you donate the entire estate? I met her fury with silence. Answer me, she shouted. Did you really give everything away? Yes, I said quietly. Every penny. Her face twisted in disbelief. You can't be serious. That was supposed to be mine. It never was, I said, my voice calm but final. It was mine to give, not yours to take. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, unable to form words. And then, for the first time in her life, she realized there was nothing she could do to control me. No amount of guilt, anger, or manipulation could reverse what had been done. She turned away, muttering something under her breath, and stormed out of the house. The front door slammed shut, and the silence that followed was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. For days after that confrontation, the house felt impossibly still. No footsteps in the hall, no forced laughter echoing off the walls, no familiar scent of Cynthia's expensive perfume lingering in the air. Just peace. Beautiful, undisturbed peace. But with peace came reflection. In the quiet of my evenings, I would sit by the window with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the dusk fade into the velvet dark. And sometimes, I would ask myself the question that haunts every parent who's been betrayed by their own child. Where did I go wrong? I raised Cynthia with love, with patience. I worked long hours, skipped meals, and went without sleep just to give her the kind of life I never had. She was born into warmth and security, surrounded by everything I fought tooth and nail to provide. But perhaps that was my mistake. Perhaps love, when given too easily, becomes something taken for granted. She never saw the struggle, the sacrifices. She only saw the outcome: comfort, stability, inheritance. Maybe that's what blinds her now. Maybe she thinks love is measured in ownership, not in effort. Howard told me to stop blaming myself. Some people, he said, have to lose something to understand its worth. I wanted to believe him. Then, one afternoon, I received a knock at the door. When I opened it, there she was, Cynthia. Not angry this time, not loud, just small, fragile, like a child again. "Mom," she said softly, "can I come in?" I nodded. She stepped inside, her eyes scanning the familiar space with a strange kind of melancholy, as though seeing it differently for the first time. We sat in the living room, silence stretching between us. I could feel the tension in the air, unspoken words building like a storm, waiting to break. Finally, she spoke. "I didn't come to fight." "That's good," I said gently. She hesitated. I was angry. I know. I said horrible things, but you have to understand how it felt. To find out you'd given everything away. To strangers. To charity. I set down my tea. "They're not strangers, Cynthia. They're mothers. Women who know what it means to fight for their children." Her lips tightened. "And what about your child? Don't I matter?" "You do," I said quietly. "But love isn't measured by what we inherit, Cynthia. It's measured by what we give, and how we treat those who gave to us first." She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring nervously. "You think I don't love you? I think you've forgotten what love looks like." Her eyes filled with tears, then real tears, not the manipulative kind I'd seen before. For the first time in a long while, I saw a flicker of the daughter I used to know. I wanted to feel secure," she whispered. "Greg keeps talking about investments, about property, about how we need to think long term. And I thought if I could take over, if I could have control, maybe he'd finally stop worrying. Maybe he'd be proud of me." I studied her face carefully. "So this wasn't about me?" Her silence was answer enough. I sighed, leaning back. "Cynthia, you don't need to earn anyone's approval by taking what isn't yours. The people who truly care for you will never measure your worth by what you own." She nodded faintly, tears sliding down her cheeks. "It's just hard to admit I was wrong. That's how healing begins," I said softly. For a while, neither of us spoke. The room was filled with the sound of the old clock ticking steadily in the background. Then she said something that caught me off guard. "You're not going to change it back, are you?" I shook my head slowly. "No, Cynthia. The decision's final." She swallowed hard. I figured. Her tone wasn't angry this time, just resigned. Maybe even a little relieved. I wondered if, deep down, she knew this was what needed to happen. That maybe losing something material would help her find something emotional she'd lost long ago. When she stood to leave, she turned at the door. "I hope those women you're helping know how lucky they are." "They don't need luck," I said gently. "They just need a chance." She nodded once, then walked out. After she left, I went upstairs and pulled open the drawer where I kept old family photographs. There she was, my little girl, missing her front teeth, covered in chocolate ice cream, grinning at the camera like the world was hers. I touched the picture gently and smiled. Somewhere inside her, that innocent child still lived. I just had to trust that one day she'd find her again. Weeks went by. Cynthia didn't visit, but she called once or twice. The conversations were short but civil. I could sense she was trying, in her own awkward way, to rebuild something. It wasn't the warm closeness I once dreamed of, but it was a beginning. Then, out of nowhere, I got a letter. Not an email, not a text, an actual handwritten letter, delivered by mail. I recognized the handwriting immediately. "Dear Mom," it began, "I've been thinking a lot lately. About us. About what I said. About what I became. I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't expect things to go back to the way they were. But I do want you to know that I understand now. You didn't give away the money. You gave away my chance to keep living the wrong way. I think maybe you saved me from myself. I'm not angry anymore. I'm grateful. Love, Cynthia." As I finished reading, my eyes blurred with tears. I pressed the letter against my chest, whispering a silent thank you to whatever grace had finally reached her heart. Later that night, as I watched the stars outside my window, I thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the pain, the loss, and the redemption. And for the first time, I realized that this wasn't just my story. It was a lesson for every parent who's ever been hurt and for every child who's ever forgotten the meaning of love. Because sometimes, to teach someone what truly matters, you have to take away what never did. Months passed, and life found a new rhythm. My mornings were quieter now, my evenings gentler. I volunteered at the community center, helping single mothers learn budgeting and basic skills to rebuild their lives. Watching them grow stronger filled something in me that money never could. I still thought about Cynthia often, of course. No mother could simply forget, but the ache that used to keep me up at night was now softer, replaced by something more peaceful, a quiet faith that things were unfolding exactly as they were meant to. Then, one spring afternoon, I received a phone call from her. "Mom?" Her voice was hesitant, almost childlike. "Could I come over? There's something I'd like to talk about." "Of course, darling," I said immediately. "Come any time." When she arrived later that day, she looked different. Older, somehow, but also lighter. The bitterness that once hardened her expression had melted away. She carried a folder in her hands, and her fingers trembled slightly as she held it. "I want to show you something," she said as she sat down at the kitchen table. I poured her tea, then watched as she opened the folder and spread out a few documents, some notes, sketches, and a typed proposal. "It's a business plan," she explained shyly, "for a nonprofit housing project. Greg and I, well, we've been doing better. We realized how much time we wasted fighting over things that didn't matter. When I saw what you did with your inheritance, I started thinking, maybe we could help too. So I started designing something inspired by what you did." I looked through the papers, my heart swelling with pride and disbelief. She'd written about affordable housing, skill-building workshops, and mentorship programs. She'd even named it the Second Chance Foundation. "It's beautiful," I said softly. She smiled, a small, genuine smile. "I wanted to make things right, Mom. You were right all along. Money means nothing if it doesn't change someone's life for the better." I reached across the table and took her hand. "You've grown, Cynthia, truly." Her eyes glistened. I had a good teacher. We both laughed a little then, awkward but sincere. Later that evening, as we walked through the garden, she told me more about her journey after that painful fallout. She said she'd started volunteering, at first out of guilt, then out of genuine compassion. She spoke about meeting women who reminded her of me. Strong, proud, selfless, and how their resilience changed the way she saw the world. "It made me realize how small I'd been," she said quietly. "How blind." I squeezed her hand. "We all lose our way sometimes, Cynthia. What matters is that you found the courage to come back." She nodded. "I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Maybe not," I said softly. "But love isn't something we earn. It's something we choose to give." The sun was setting, painting the garden in shades of gold and rose. For a long time, we just stood there, the silence between us now warm instead of cold. After she left that night, I sat at my writing desk and pulled out my old journal. For years, it had been my quiet confidant, the place I'd poured my fears, my heartbreak, and my hopes. I flipped through the pages and found an entry from months before, one I'd written after the fallout. If she could only see how love can't be bought or claimed, maybe she'd understand why I gave it all away. And now, she did. That night, sleep came easily for the first time in a long while. But life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. A few weeks later, I received an invitation in the mail. The Second Chance Foundation was hosting its first public event, a fundraising dinner. On the back of the invitation was a handwritten note from Cynthia. "Mom, you'll always be the reason this exists. Please come. It would mean everything to me." When I arrived that evening, the hall was filled with laughter and light. Women from all walks of life mingled with donors and volunteers. And there, at the front of the room, stood my daughter, poised, confident, radiant in a simple navy dress. As she took the microphone, she smiled directly at me. "Before I say anything else," she began, "I want to thank the person who taught me the real meaning of wealth, my mother." The audience turned to look at me, but I barely noticed. My eyes were fixed on her, and my heart swelled with pride. "She showed me," Cynthia continued, "that love isn't something we take, it's something we give. That compassion is stronger than control, and that generosity can heal what greed destroys. Everything you see here tonight exists because she chose to act with courage instead of anger. And I hope that one day I can live with even half her grace." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. When she stepped off the stage, she came straight to me and wrapped her arms around me. "I love you, Mom," she whispered. "I love you too, sweetheart," I said, my voice trembling. "Always." The night went on in a blur of speeches, laughter, and gratitude. People came up to thank me, to share their own stories, to tell me how Cynthia's foundation had already changed lives. And for the first time in years, I felt a deep, unshakable peace. Later, as the crowd began to thin and the hall emptied, I stood by the window, watching the lights of the city flicker below. The world outside looked the same, but I knew everything had changed. Because this wasn't just a story of loss and betrayal anymore. It was a story of rebirth, of how love, when tested and tried, can transform even the hardest of hearts. And as I looked over at Cynthia, laughing softly with her volunteers, radiant and alive, I realized something profound. Sometimes the greatest inheritance we can give our children isn't wealth, it's wisdom. As the last guest left and the music faded, Cynthia and I stayed behind to help the volunteers clean up. She stacked chairs while I folded tablecloths, the two of us working side by side in comfortable silence. For the first time in years, there was no tension, no sharpness in her tone, no distance, just an easy, familiar rhythm, like the old days when we'd cook together in the kitchen or decorate the house for Christmas. When we were done, she sat beside me on the stage steps, her heels dangling, and sighed softly. "Do you ever think Dad would have been proud of us?" I smiled faintly. I think he would have been amazed, maybe a little stunned, that we finally stopped arguing. She laughed, a warm, genuine laugh that reached her eyes. I guess it took losing everything to realize what we actually had. I reached over and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, just like I used to when she was little. "You didn't lose everything, honey. You just found something better." She nodded, then hesitated. "You know, when I first found out about the charity donation, I was furious. I told Greg I'd never forgive you. But then, when I went to visit one of the shelters your donation helped build," her voice trembled, "there was this woman. She had 2 kids, and she told me it was the first time in years they'd slept somewhere safe. She didn't even know your name, but she said whoever helped her must have been an angel." Tears welled up in her eyes. That's when I realized how wrong I was. I kept thinking about how I wanted more, when all you wanted was to give. That changed everything. I squeezed her hand. Sometimes, love needs to break before it can rebuild. We sat there quietly for a long moment. The janitor switched off the overhead lights, and the hall grew dim, lit only by the soft glow of the exit signs. Outside, the city hummed. Distant traffic, laughter, the faint rhythm of life moving on. Cynthia broke the silence. "I've been thinking, maybe we could work together. You have the experience, I have the drive. The foundation could really grow if we teamed up." I blinked, surprised but touched. "You really mean that?" She smiled. "I do. Besides, I think the world could use a little more of your magic." I laughed softly. "Well, I can't promise magic, but I can promise wisdom, and maybe a few home-cooked meals. Deal, she said, grinning. Over the next few months, we did just that. We worked together every day, building programs, meeting donors, and expanding outreach. The foundation grew faster than either of us expected. Newspapers started writing about us, the mother-daughter duo who turned heartbreak into hope. And in every interview, Cynthia always gave me credit. My mom taught me that generosity isn't weakness, she'd say. It's strength. It's the kind that changes lives quietly, one person at a time. One evening, after a long day of meetings, she brought over dinner to my house. Thought I'd return the favor, she said proudly, placing a casserole dish on the table. I lifted the lid and inhaled deeply. Is this your version of my old chicken bake? She laughed. Sort of. I added a few twists. We sat down and ate together, the air filled with laughter and warmth. Every bite was delicious, but the taste wasn't what mattered. It was the feeling, the quiet joy of connection, of love rediscovered. Halfway through the meal, she reached across the table and took my hand. Mom, thank you. For everything. For forgiving me. For believing in me even when I didn't deserve it. I met her gaze and smiled. You didn't need to earn my love, Cynthia. You just needed to remember it was always there. She blinked back tears. I think I finally do. Later that night, after she'd gone home, I stepped out onto the porch. The stars stretched across the sky, glittering above the quiet neighborhood. The same porch where I'd once sat alone, heartbroken, and unsure of what the future would hold. Now, the silence was different, peaceful, not empty. I thought of all the lives the charity had touched, all the families who'd found hope through something that began with pain. Maybe that was the lesson life had been trying to teach me all along, that even the deepest wounds can bloom into something beautiful if we allow love to lead. A few weeks later, we held a celebration dinner marking 1 year of the foundation's success. The event was larger than ever. Hundreds of supporters, media coverage, and stories from people whose lives had changed. Cynthia stood on stage once again, her voice steady and proud. A year ago, she said, I thought my mother's generosity had ruined me, but I see now it saved me. She didn't take my inheritance. She gave me purpose. And because of her, thousands of people now have homes, jobs, and second chances. The crowd erupted in applause, but I could hardly hear it over the rush of emotion in my chest. As the evening wound down, she surprised me with one last gesture. A video began playing on the large screen, a slideshow of the people we'd helped. Families moving into new homes, children smiling, volunteers embracing. At the end of the video, the words appeared, "In loving honor of my mother, who gave away everything